Thank you, Joanna. Welcome again, everyone. My name is Deirdre Haniff. I'm the Senior Climate Resilience Manager with Charles River Watershed Association, and I'll be your speaker and moderator for tonight. On the slide, you'll see our agenda, which will include covering project background and share some updates on our flood modeling project. And as you can see at the very end, we will have Q&A from the audience. And so throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the chat to send your questions directly to our actually myself and my colleague Joanna, so we can track them for the end of the session. As we talk about our watershed tonight, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that the Charles River watershed resides on occupied territory of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag tribes. We acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. We acknowledge that a land acknowledgement is not enough, and we continue to learn, grow, and listen to Native voices as we advocate for a resilient future in our work. For those who may not be familiar with Charles River Watershed Association, or CRWA, we have been around since 1965. We are an environmental advocacy organization working towards protecting, restoring, and enhancing the Charles River and its watershed through science, advocacy, and the law. And like many urban rivers in this country, the Charles River has been historically contaminated, resulting in poor water quality and aquatic habitat. And our work continues to focus on ensuring that the river and its watershed is healthy. To orient everyone to the kind of total geographic area that we're talking about, as you can see on the map, the Charles River itself is 80 miles long and starts from Hopkinton, and it moves downstream to the Boston Harbor. Our watershed, which is the area of land that captures rain and drains it into the river, is a little over 300 square miles. And 35 Massachusetts towns and cities are part of our watershed. And with all of our work, but especially with flooding, we take a watershed scale view because we know that what happens upstream doesn't stay upstream. Tonight, you will be hearing from a couple of speakers. My colleague Julie, who is a longtime member of CRWA and manages our regional collaborative of municipalities and serves as the project manager for the project you'll hear tonight, will cover some background as well as highlighting all the work we've been doing for the past couple of years. Martin Dietz is a Mashpee Wampanoag tribal member and an Indigenous consultant with CRWA, and will also be sharing the Indigenous perspective of flooding in our environment. And lastly, we'll have Meredith Confrey, conservation agent with the town of Denham, who will share from the municipal perspective of how this regional project applies to the local level. With that, I will pass it on to my colleague, Julie. Julie, are you?
Yes.
All right. Take it away.
Okay. All right. Excellent. And yes, Sylvia, I'll try to keep it at a slow pace. Feel free to remind me. Always good to have those reminders. Good evening, folks. Nice to see some familiar names and some new names in our meeting tonight. I'm Julie Wood, the Climate Resilience Director at Charles River Watershed Association, as Dira mentioned. The project we're talking about tonight is not just a Charles River Watershed Association initiative. This is a partnership of many cities and towns that have come together through our regional climate collaborative, the Charles River Climate Compact, to work on mitigating the impacts of climate change at a regional scale. We've been doing this since 2019, and the project that we're talking about tonight focused on flooding because that was one of the primary concerns that was in common to almost all of the communities that joined the group. Next slide. The reason flooding is such a concern is because in our area, one of the key impacts of climate change is that rain is coming in more intense and larger storms. So, while the annual rainfall totals may not be vastly different, how the rain is coming to the ground is getting very different. The rainfall is coming in intense storms. That's where we get a lot of rain in a short amount of time. And the rainfall is coming in large storms. That's where we get maybe 3 or 4 inches in a day, 3 or 4 inches plus, I should say, in a day. Um, these are the situations that set us up for flooding. Our current infrastructure isn't really built for this kind of storm. Next slide. The first thing we wanted to do as a group is just get basic information about where and when flooding would occur as our climate changed. We're making decisions now that impact decades of land use planning. Where to build, what to build, how high to build. We're making all these decisions now. We need to have the data about where and when to expect flooding in the future. So that was the first very important piece of this puzzle, just getting that basic data and sharing that with our communities. Data democracy has been a big value of this project. This data is all on the website. I would encourage everybody who's on this webinar this evening to please check out our online Charles River Flood Model Viewer. Um, plug in your address, plug in your school, whatever you like, play around with it, look at different storm scenarios. You'll see where flooding is expected, as well as the depth of anticipated flooding from those storms. On this slide, we're also listing all the partners who are currently involved, all the municipal partners who are currently involved in the project. Next slide. Since we have been going on this project for about 5 years now, we have been able to accomplish a lot. Developing that model, providing that data was victory number one, but we didn't stop there. Once we understood the impact that was expected from climate change, we started turning our focus to solutions, identifying and developing solutions. So we developed our first flood mitigation plan in 2022. We've already updated that once in 2024. We learn more, we know more, we update our recommendations. Along the way, we've also been able to identify a number of site-specific projects because while we're looking at storms well into the future, say a 2070 storm that we might expect 50 years down the line, we need to start planning for that now. So we need to both adapt our current infrastructure as we go and build actual mitigation projects that help us build more flood storage into our landscape. And we're going to highlight some of those past projects tonight. Next slide. Um, so as I mentioned, rain getting stronger, rain coming faster, flooding will increase. This is a zoom in example of that model. So again, please check it out for yourself. But it'll show you in pretty good detail where and when to expect flooding and how deep it will be. One of the storms we looked at is a design storm that we call a 100-year storm, also called a 1% storm. This is a theoretical storm, which currently is about 8 inches. In the future, we anticipate to be more like 11 inches, so a lot bigger. And that will result in a 14% increase of flooding across our watershed and impact more than 75 critical facilities. All data we would not have without this Charles River flood model. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hartman Dietz.
Uh, well,
Oh, there you go.
Winnie Nakan, everyone. Nataswis Hartman, Nutamas Masipi, Ni Masipi Wampanoag. Good evening. My name's Hartman. I'm from Mashpee. I'm a Mashpee Wampanoag. And yeah, I guess it's a funny thing to think about. Indigenous perspective on flooding and floodplains. Because the number one thing that Native people did in addressing flooding was simply to not build in flood zones. And you looked at the world, you didn't try to you know shape the landscape to suit your needs. You tried to figure out how to work in balance with the land holistically. Um, to see a holistic system is important, and I think that that's where a lot of the Western science is starting to uh, move towards, which I'm happy to see. I think it's an improvement in the outlook of the world itself, is to learn from it holistically, not to divide it into so many subcategories that you can't get a sense of the bigger picture. Um, in that, Julie mentioned the idea of looking forward and looking ahead, and one of the main things I think that cities and municipalities can do is really just think about the not the day to day or what we can expect on your average week, but those rare episodes of like 100-year storm. Where is the flooding going to be there? And to consider that when people ask for zoning variances or to be able to, build closer to wetlands, that they're putting themselves at the risk, and they're putting, you know, the desires for whatever it is that they've got going on above their common sense of, is this a practical solution to what they want in the long term. And I think that most people wouldn't really want to build something if they knew that it would be flooded and washed away. They just don't think about it. They don't think about that worst case scenario so often, and we have to. As Julie mentioned, these storms are getting bigger and bigger and more intense. And I grew up in California, and I remember the Oakland Hills fire. Uh, they said that's a once every 100 years type of fire, and then we had another fire and another fire and another fire, and at this point, my mom just left there this last year, and now they've got fire seasons where every year you could expect major wildfires, and it's going to be the same with flooding. Um, as we look into the future with more intense storms and more intense weather, we're not going to have just this off chance flood that happens. They're going to be regular occurrences. Um, we have to really look at the value of the wetlands themselves when we think about zoning and all that, because they are uh, parts of the landscape that are really able to absorb water and help to keep things in balance. To eliminate them or to build too close to them or find ways to make exceptions for people in development and giving people permits, you have to really look at that extreme case, and sometimes you have to tell developers no. We've seen so much development happen over so long without that kind of forethought, and it's cost us in the long run. Um, we also have to look at the impervious surfaces. How much cement we have on the ground, how much of the earth itself has been built over. Where can we open up areas to actually have soil exposed, to the sky, so that when rain falls, it doesn't, build up in the culverts and the gutters, but instead can actually soak into the soil, which is what it's does when it can hit soil. And that does a lot to mitigate flooding. And it also helps to, have these plants grow and thrive. And that helps our CO2, and that helps our whole cycle of climate change and the heating of the atmosphere itself. Um, it's all interconnected. And that's one of the things I think that Western science has has struggled with is the fact that you can't simply divide things. You can gain from studying things in a divided way, but it doesn't divide them in the actual world. So you still have to worry about and learn about and consider those things that are not a part of the particular, segment of knowledge that you're looking at. You have to say, all right, this is, you know, you may be studying medicine, but you also have to study geography because, there's plants, there's weather conditions, there's, things that might affect people's health that are, matter of where they're located in the world. Um, and Western science hasn't done a good job at pursuing knowledge in that way. Indigenous knowledge uh, tends to be very much about how things are interconnected from dispersed forms of knowledge and understanding of things. So we understand that the all these things are interconnected, whether it's the like the carbon and the water and the trees and all of that. It's all interconnected, and it's interconnected with our food. It's interconnected with our daily lives, and um, we are starting to appreciate, I think, as a world, as a society, those interconnections. Um, Yeah, so I think it's just really about valuing those wetlands, valuing the ability of those bodies to absorb water. It's about um, it's about getting rid of some of these parking lots and in previous surfaces that really just shed water rather than help to absorb it. And yeah, we're going to have to also mitigate because of these decisions that were made in the past. Decisions like to fill in all of Back Bay, which used to be a whole estuary where you really help to mitigate flooding or irregular rainfalls by having big wetland areas like that. But once you fill it in and build on top of it, you're going to expect that same area that is going to stay low, and water is going to continue to want to find its way into those areas that were water not so long ago, especially when they've been artificially transformed into dry land. You're going to find that water still wants to go to those places. That's where the balance is. And so we have to find ways to mitigate that with, projects like, underground culverts to catch water in, or, to really consider how we've structured our drainage. And of course, we also have to really look at what's in that drainage. I know one of the other campaigns we have is the Cut the Crap campaign, where the overflow from the sewers is allowed to go out into the river because the systems that we have in place are not meant, they're not built to take on the extremes. They're built only for the day to day. And day to day, it just simply isn't how we need to approach this. We need to approach it as something that we have to deal with for these extremes, because these extremes do happen. They do. And so we have to consider building our world to suit those extreme moments, because we know they're coming. It's not a matter of, oh, if they're coming, or, this idea of the 100 years, like I said, with these 100-year fires, like I saw out in California when I was a kid, and now they have a fire season. It's going to be the same thing with these floods. These 100-year floods that Julie mentioned are going to be the floods of every year. We're going to see floods like this in each season because the storms are going to get more intense, and they're going to dump your whole year's worth of rain on you in just a couple of short weeks, and the system isn't built to handle that. So we have to start thinking about this world in a more holistic sense, and to deal with the water in that more holistic sense. It's always going to find a place to go, and we have to give it some place to go. And at this point right now, the places that we give it to go is our basements and our garages and our first stories of our buildings, and that's of course not where we want it. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to the next, and I think that's my time is up. So, thanks for including me. Take care.
You, Hartman, thank you. That was great. And that is going to transition us into our essentially the themes for the rest of the evening. taking a holistic approach, in this case, a watershed approach, and finding new solutions, and in this case, nature-based solutions. So Hartman mentioned that Indigenous folks dealt with flooding by staying out of the floodplains, having their permanent structures or setting up their community away from the river because flooding is a natural occurrence. Rivers have floodplains to deal with flooding. We've all seen sometimes we get more rain, sometimes we find ourselves in a multi-year drought. It waxes and it wanes. That's how nature works. The issue with flooding, as Hartman alluded to, is that these floodwaters are impacting our built infrastructure. So what are we trying, just a little level setting for this project, what are we trying to do? We're trying to reduce those flood impacts. We're trying to make sure future flooding isn't paralyzing our community. So we set 3 primary goals for the project. Future flooding doesn't impact critical infrastructure, things like police, fire, schools. Those are safe. Access to those areas are safe. Preventing flooding in environmental justice neighborhoods or other areas with climate vulnerable residents. These are residents who may not have the resources to move or self-adapt. So can we look at our infrastructure and set these neighborhoods up to be safe in an emergency? And then finally, just a straight numbers goal. Future flooding is no worse than present day flooding as our climate changes. If we can live with some level of flooding, perhaps it's the level we're used to today. As this flooding threatens to get worse, can we adapt our landscape so that the impacts don't get worse? So that's what we're talking about as we look at solutions. Getting into some of the solutions we've looked at now. Next slide. One of our most promising solution is actually a policy-based solution, a solution we nickname the Watertown Rule, because this is a rule that exists in the city of Watertown, a few other communities as well. But what they have done is required development project, so a private property when it gets developed or redeveloped, to build into that parcel considerable storage, considerable space to hold the water. So they actually require properties to store the 100-year present-day storm on site. That's a little over 8 inches. That runoff needs to be stored on site safely, where it's not going to impact the infrastructure, and where it's not going to go downhill, downstream, and impact someone else's infrastructure. So I mentioned one of our goals was to make sure that flooding of today doesn't get any worse. And this Watertown Rule achieves that goal and actually makes it a little better. That's what this graph shows you. The green is flooding of today, the baseline. The blue is future flooding if we don't implement any solutions. And then the orange is future flooding with the Watertown Rule in place. So not only is it not worse, it's actually a little better so this is a very effective solution. We've been talking with many of our communities about implementing this. This could be its whole own presentation, but wanted to preview that for folks. Next slide. These are our big picture recommendations. The first one is what I just went through, strong stormwater regulations that target flooding. Of course, targeting water quality and treating the pollution also critical, but we can do a little more if we're holding and treating more water. Taking broad and aggressive action, the impact is large. The solution is going to need to be large. Using a science-based approach to implement solutions where they're most effective, because we took that holistic view and the watershed scale approach when we've been able to identify what solutions are best at what locations. And we actually have that data to make recommendations. We do need to change our landscape, though. We do need to make some changes and adaptations. We're leaning into nature-based solutions. There may also be a place for gray solutions. I'm going to walk through a few. But we love to get resident impact on those. We love to work with residents on those. We love to get ideas from residents for those because these are things that have the potential to impact the way your community looks or the way your community works. Exploring regional governance structures. That's key for flooding. What we do upstream will go downstream. We're not having those conversations right now, but we need to be and start taking action now so we are ready 50 years from now. A few more examples of these solutions and what they mean on the ground. Next slide. We have identified actual site-specific projects, and many of those have already been advanced either to additional design or actual construction. Our very first one, construction, is happening in Newton and will wrap up shortly. That is a large storage tank under a playing field at a park in Newton. And then we've also done some sub-watershed or regional scale projects, which I'll preview those for you as well. Next slide. A little more detail on these priority sites that we've worked on. If you see your town on here and you don't know about the project, please check out our website because we have information on our website about these specific projects. Next slide. So what do we look at? What does it mean to identify and look and produce a priority project site? As I said, we're looking primarily for nature-based solutions. One example in Needham, we looked at a possible wetland restoration, some stream restoration, taking a stream out of a culvert, as well as some green infrastructure, things like rain gardens. At Hardy Pond in Waltham, we also looked at wetland restoration and green stormwater infrastructure. But in this case, and a few others that I'm going to show you, we also looked at using the pond to store water during a storm. This is another solution that has so far shown to be extremely effective. And the way this works is that during a rainstorm, you may have your pond just hold more water. So you have an outlet structure on your pond. You raise it when it's raining, keep the water in the pond where it belongs, essentially, not going so high that it's overtopping the banks, but using that pond for storage and then slowly letting it out after the rain has passed. There are some more innovative approaches where you're taking in real-time data and using weather forecasts and weather tracking to, lower and raise the pond level during a storm. So all sorts of interesting opportunities there, but another very effective potential solution for our area. Next slide. Two more. These are two more ponds we looked at. Mirror Lake crosses the border between Norfolk and Wrentham, and Lake Pearl. As you can see, these have a fairly large footprint. So being able to lower the water level in these ponds prior to the rain event, allow it to fill up during the rain event, does hold that potential floodwater safely in the pond and protect downstream infrastructure and downstream residents. Next slide. And then just wanted to preview some of what is to come as this initiative is ongoing. We're going to have some new online materials coming. There's a lot of pluses to the watershed scale focus of this project. However, one piece of feedback we have received is that it can be hard for folks to take in information for just their community, which often is your area of concern and focus. And we hear that, we understand that. So we are working to make our materials, all this information on solutions and recommendations, we want to make that much more accessible by municipality, by community, so that you can just easily click and see all the information for your community. Next slide. That will also include some offline materials, just quick, quick, easy read information on your community. What are the stats? What are the recommendations? What are the possible site-specific solutions? So that will be coming this spring, along with a website. I think of a preview on the next slide, along with a website where you can just click on your community name and find all this information in one place. So please be on the lookout for that. All of this will be done the very latest by the end of June, but ideally much sooner. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to one of our municipal partners on this project, Meredith Confrey, to give the municipal perspective on this initiative.
All right, thanks so much, Julie, and thank you all for having me here tonight. My name is Meredith Comfrey. I've been with the town of Dedham for about 2.5 years as their conservation agent. So we do a lot of wetlands permitting, but then we also get to do some of the other fun stuff like work with our amazing watershed associations and work on projects to help, alleviate climate change and flooding like we're talking about tonight. And so I wanted to just start by giving kind of a background of, where Dedham is. So we're going to be zooming in on one municipality tonight. Dedham is part of the Charles River watershed and the Neponset River watershed. And the Charles River watershed, as you can kind of see on that map, is in kind of our northwest portion of Dedham. And we actually have I think sometimes it's easy to forget, but we have a lot of the Charles River in Dedham. There's 9 miles of it, so it's almost 10% of the whole length. But it kind of uniquely snakes around this one neighborhood in Dedham. And so we were talking earlier about foresight and planning and how, people just wanted to put houses where they could squeeze them in the 50s and they weren't really thinking about future flooding. And so there's one neighborhood in particular in Dedham, which is called Riverdale, which is well named. And the Charles River basically snakes around this whole neighborhood. And it's sometimes nicknamed as Dedham Island. So it's kind of interesting, kind of looking at how the landscape impacted that decision to put a neighborhood kind of in the middle of the Charles River. But I just wanted to point it out because I think it's an example of kind of what suburban communities and communities closer to Boston are kind of dealing with is planning decisions from a long time ago is now kind of, we're looking at, okay, the houses are there. So what do we do? And how do we make sure the people that live there are informed? And how do we make sure that any future development is meets all of our requirements and is looking towards the future as well. And so I also wanted to point out specifically in the Charles River watershed in Dedham, we have many, many acres of land that was purchased in the 70s as part of the Charles River Natural Valley Storage Area project. And so that's kind of a positive example, I guess, of folks and planners having the foresight to prevent future flooding. So as part of that program, the federal government and the Army Corps of Engineers purchased almost, I think, 8,000 acres. Let me see my notes. Yeah, 8,000 acres of wetlands all along the Charles River. And these are areas that now could never be developed, basically. And so by purchasing it and making sure that they were protected from development, these areas are now able to fill up when the floodwaters rise And I think it's prevented so much damage and so much, even harm to humans and where they live. And it's one of those examples of having the foresight to make the economic decision up front to spend a bunch of money and purchase land for protection. And I do think a lot of Dedham, we have a lot of that land in Dedham, and I think it's helped alleviate a lot of flooding, specifically in that Riverdale neighborhood. Um, so that's just a little background of, how the Charles River interacts with Dedham. We've been part of the Climate Compact since its beginning, I believe. And we've really, just really appreciated the partnership with the Charles River folks. And they do a lot of the work that is really important, but oftentimes there's not as much time in the municipal staff to dive into, I guess. So with that, I'll kind of jump into a specific site. So this is a priority site, as Julie mentioned earlier. This is one of the many that they're working on right now, but this one is in Dedham. This is Barnes Memorial Park, which is located, it's towards the center of town, and there's a stream that runs along the park that empties out of a large pond in Dedham, and then it ends up in the Charles River. And so this is a great example of using that flood modeling tool for project siting. So when you when you run this site in the flood model at pretty much every interval, even the smallest storms, this park floods. It is very low lying, and using that flood modeling tool makes, you look at this and you're like, wow, that's a great candidate for some green infrastructure and some flooding solutions. Some other reasons why this site is a really great choice for kind of a priority project is it's owned by the town, so we have more control of what happens to the site. It's a lot harder to, execute something like this on land that isn't town owned. So it's kind of simple, a simple reason, but it's actually really important to say because I think people are like, why isn't the town doing more on this land? And it's like, well, we don't own that, so it makes it harder to kind of execute those projects. But so this is town owned, and it's also located in an environmental justice area of town. So Julie had mentioned that that's a really important priority of the Charles River is to make sure these projects are happening in areas that need more investment and historically haven't had as much investment. And the town of Dedham feels the same way. Like it's great to kind of focus in on this project in particular. Um, and so this park, it does flood a lot. It's very low lying, and there's also kind of that real world impact that residents feel when they have to cancel a softball game or a baseball game. And so I think this project is also really great because you get that buy-in from residents. The flood models and climate change data can sometimes like overwhelm residents, but I think when you have kind of a tangible real world kind of example of like, hey, this is what happens when it floods, and now you can't have your baseball game here. I think that kind of gets people to buy into a project more. And so I'll just kind of quickly touch on some of the tools in the toolkit to make this park have more flood storage. So you'll see here, the proposed design would generate 100, is that 100,000 or 100? Yeah, 100,000 million gallons of floodwaters, which is what we're looking for. So more flood storage, obviously. Um, and starting kind of on the left side, you'll see that's the stream that runs along the park, eventually ends up in the Charles River. So one of the tools is to kind of flesh out more stream storage in that existing stream. So that stream, it actually kind of follows along Providence Highway, which is a major urban area, and it definitely sees a lot of sedimentation. There's a lot of invasive species along the stream. So by working to improve the ecological health of that stream, it's going to be able to function better during a flood event. So increasing that storage is, it's great for holding floodwaters, but it also will benefit the, the biodiversity of that area as well. So when you're, working on pulling out invasives and replanting with native plants, there's so many other benefits that comes along with that. Same thing with the wetland restoration. So you'll kind of see along the right bank of that stream, proposed wetland restoration. And so that's almost like the second line of defense. So if the stream, floods out, then the waters have a place to go. By replanting and restoring a wetland area, you're creating more root systems to soak up the floodwaters as well, versus just sheet flowing over a field. So there's great opportunity to capture more floodwaters there as well. And then going rightwards towards the open space area. So that is about renaturalizing the open space. So adding more plants, adding more trees, again, creating more of a root system and healthy soils to actually function as proper flood storage versus sheet flowing over that park. I think it's important to touch on like the balance. And I think that was maybe the one thing that residents were a little unsure about is can we take away open space by adding trees? Should we, you know, minimize some of the park areas? And I think that's where having those conversations is really important. Because, especially with parks and stuff, people want to make sure there's enough space. But, there's a way you can do it that will benefit everybody. And then lastly, this project will add some green stormwater infrastructure to the site as well. And so you can kind of see there's some roadway stormwater infrastructure, and then it looks like, I'm not sure exactly what's proposed there, but some additional stormwater infrastructure kind of at the start of where the constructed wetland would go. So it's a really great project, and funding has been requested for fiscal year 2027, I believe. So hopefully we get to construct this, and we're really looking forward to continuing to collaborate with the Charles River on this project. And with that, I think that's all. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Meredith. It's always great to hear from, folks who are actually on the ground being able to do this work, and, the perspective of engaging with residents as we figure out what the best solution is, which helps transition, before we go into our question session, just talking a little bit about our outreach and engagement. As our other speakers have mentioned, as Julie have mentioned, the solutions that we want to see in the community is what we'd like to hear from the community. We want to hear from resident what types of impacts they're experiencing, what type of solutions will work in their community, how can it be integrated into the culture of the community and the current landscape. So a lot of what we've been doing for the past couple of years is going out to be with the community. We've been going to a lot of tabling events at community celebrations. You see here a list of, we actually went out with Meredith to the Dedham Biodiversity Day at Barnes Memorial Park to talk about the project itself and get some feedback. We've been to different harvest festivals, some farmers market, and we're looking to go to a Maple Magic event in Natick. I think they'll be giving out maple pancakes, which is always a bonus for us when we go out in community. And then in the past 2 years, we've also really started to host workshops with our partners, or a subset or group of residents who may be more interested in learning about the project. And this is a more interactive engagement style where we're having more intimate conversations about everyone's experiences with climate change and how we can manage the flooding impacts. Some of these engagement that we've done have actually helped us identify potential projects for the flood model. So as you're sitting in this call, and this is kind of spurring some ideas, please feel free to put it in the chat or to reach out to us after this. And with that being said, we are continuing to look for other events. As Julie said, this project is ongoing. It'll be ongoing for a long time. So every year we're looking to get out in the community and hear your experiences and your ideas. So this is kind of a call for anyone in the audience who is interested in co-hosting a workshop with us for the flood model. We are eager to partner, and we can also provide compensation. And lastly, as we continue to grow our project impact, as well as our list of priority projects in different communities, we're also looking for community liaisons to join us in our work. So if you're looking to engage and organize with your community around flood resilience, social resilience, please reach out to myself or Julie or Joanna. We'd love to get to know you and see and be able to work together. And lastly, what's next for our project? What are we doing in this next couple of months? We are continuing to develop concept designs for our priority sites, working with our municipal partners for this phase of the project. Like I mentioned, we're hoping to grow our team with community liaisons into the next couple of years, and also looking to share out more of our project results at community events and workshops. We also typically host another webinar around June to kind of summarize some of the work that we'll be doing between now and then. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And then hopefully get all of that online material update accessible to you. We're really hoping that we'll be able to provide digestible, easily accessible data and content that you could use to spur conversations about thinking about and planning for flood resilience. And then lastly, as you log off later tonight, we're hoping that you will be able to take a few minutes to also share your thoughts in our survey, which I think you'll just have a pop-up browser at the end of this webinar. All right, so we have quite a bit of time for questions. Again, if you have a question, please feel free to send it to in the chat to myself or Joanna, and we can moderate through them. And I already have a question in the chat come through. The question is, could you please elaborate on the Watertown rule? For example, which communities have opted in and how it fits with other solutions or those that may be proposed by residents and community partners? Julie, can I pass that off to you?
Yes, absolutely. So the Watertown rule that I'm was talking about here is just one very specific performance standards in Watertown's local stormwater regulations. So it requires properties that develop or redevelop around, the Lower Charles. It does tend to be mostly redevelopment. As it redevelops, the property has to plan for storage of runoff from an 8-inch storm, and has to hold that water. Typically, what we've seen, or what Watertown is seeing, is tanks that hold the water and let it infiltrate into the ground. That way, it's sort of a dynamic system where water is going out and coming in at the same time. So the tank maybe doesn't have to be as large as if it were just holding all the water at once. So that's the primary solution that properties have been using to comply with that rule. It essentially keeps the water where it's falling, and it does not allow it to flow downstream, which is what causes flooding, having just too much water in one place at the same time. And those key flooding spots tend to be, downhill, downstream locations. Um, so it's one piece of, their local stormwater bylaw, and then one piece of a climate adaptation standard, or a climate adaptation plan that a community may take. So certainly other things like surface rain gardens that include shading and biodiversity. Meredith walked through the elements of the proposed work at Barnes Memorial Park, which also includes some wetlands enhancements. So all of those things can layer on top of one another. I believe at least one other community in our watershed, Waltham, has something similar. Other communities have high targets for storage, but not quite as high. Hopefully, I hit every piece of that question.
I think you did. And there's actually another question that came in also asking about Watertown Rule or related to Watertown Rule. The question is there an example from another state that is kind of the gold standard that we're labeling the Watertown Rule in Massachusetts that we might have looked at, which
Not for stormwater performance standards. We have looked to other states a lot for bigger picture flood management structures. A lot of other states have a more formal structure for this regional type approach that we're doing more on a voluntary basis. Charles River Watershed Association is leading this initiative, bringing the partners in the sense of bringing the partners together and finding the funding. But it's essentially all voluntary. In other states, there are things like flood councils or regional flood managers, regional watershed management groups that maybe have a regulatory charge to do things like this, look at flooding at a regional scale and find flood mitigation solutions on a scale. So we have, yes, been looking at lots of inspiration from other states on that piece.
Great, thank you. Another question that came in the chat, and maybe both Meredith and Julie could speak on it, but the question is, are there solutions that involve private homeowners? They're thinking of in dry areas of the country where homeowners can't have grass. Are there cities or towns that encourage or incentivize private owners to have more pervious and fewer impervious surfaces? So maybe, I don't know, Meredith, if you want to share work that Dedham is doing.
Sure, yeah, I'll start. So one thing that came to mind is Dedham has implemented a stormwater utility fee, which helps fund some of the MS4 requirements for our town. But as part of that, it's almost, some residents obviously don't like it because it's an extra fee that they have to pay in their tax bill every month or every quarter. But It's kind of an opportunity for homeowners to think about the impervious that's on their property, and they can remove certain amounts of impervious to get their bill down. And I think that it's kind of a great kind of incentive to do that, honestly. That's kind of just one piece of it, but then I think the other piece is um, at the town level, we're trying to do better at educating our residents on little things that they can do, on the day to day at their homes. We have a rain barrel program. We have some outreach materials on planting native. I think that's one of the things that can always become kind of lower priority when we're having to, focus more on the permitting side of things. And that's more making, we can hold developers to do all these things, but we can't necessarily go house to house and have every person in town do this unless they are getting a permit from us. So I think that that's something we want to spend more time on, is just kind of the general outreach and education on simple things that you can do at your own homes to help with flooding, and just kind of be a better piece in the puzzle of solving all of these issues. So yeah, Julie, do you have anything to add on that?
Well, I was gonna add, when we look at the landscape again, taking that watershed approach, um, we do see a lot of the impacts do happen on private property. Obviously, the vast majority of the land is also private property, and a lot of that is residential. So we just looked at tree canopy not too long ago, for example. A lot of the tree loss in the watershed occurs on private land and private residential land in the last decade or so. A lot of the impervious cover increase also happens on private land. Um, so just thinking about your own property and what happens when a raindrop would hit it. Driveway, clear example, it's gonna be impervious runoff. You probably need a driveway, but think about lawn too. Lawn can be fairly impervious as well. So one thing we encourage folks to think about, if there are areas that don't have to be lawn, you don't have to maintain them as turf grass lawn. Maybe you can, as Meredith was saying, plant some natives, make it more of a garden, make it more absorbent to the rainwater. And we do have guides. Do have some homeowner rain garden guides on our website and all that stuff if you want to go that far. But I think just thinking about how impervious your own parcel is and seeing what you can do to make that less pervious, because every little bit adds up. That essentially is what our modeling shows us. If we're building more storage into the landscape all across the watershed, it will make a difference.
Great, thank you both. Let me see what other questions have come in. One question that came in asked how many cities and towns in the watershed have a role in government similar to Meredith's. So Meredith shared she's the conservation agent with the town of Denham. And I believe every municipality in the watershed has a conservation commission, which is typically also then served with a staff position, which is a conservation agent. But I know not every town may have their like a full-time conservation agent. We actually have some towns that we work it with that share staff positions. So every municipality has kind of different capacity for their role, but just to add on to that, for our Charles River Climate Compact, with which Meredith serves on, with other Denham staff, we have a wide kind of variety of government roles that are represented in our collaborative. So not only conservation agents, but we also have, public works folk, planners, stormwater specific folks, and also some who are volunteers representing their town in our collaborative. So a lot of different folks in each town have different roles that serve to build, local resiliency in our watershed. Okay, let me look. I got another question or maybe also comment. And the question was whether or not we have looked into redirecting street runoff into the green space between the road and the sidewalk, as well as into front lawns. This is probably on a voluntary basis. I'm assuming more so for private properties, and that this seems to be a new practice in Arizona to harvest rainwater since it is a desert climate. That seems like a good way to reduce street runoff to lower flooding down the line. I don't know, Julie or Meredith, if you want to speak on that type of solution.
Sure. Yeah, I can speak broadly, and then Meredith, if you have any Dedham examples, that would be great. The first question is asking about what we would call a green street, and that is using usually very small green infrastructure systems, right along the edge of roadways, right along the edge of sidewalks. Sometimes these green infrastructure systems can be as small as one tree pit or one tree well. And so, yes, we are advocating for those anytime, we're on a project that involves roadway reconstruction or commenting on a project that involves roadway reconstruction. We at Charles River Watershed Association push for those kinds of solutions. They are typically more focused at pollution removal than flood storage and flood benefits because they have relatively small footprints. Just because, as described, those spaces are small right along the roadway or right along the sidewalk. So those are very important for pollution removal. If you do enough, the impacts, there will be a potential impact for flooding if you get that size and volume, but typically those are focused on water quality. But yes, we love green street solutions. And then the rainwater harvesting, I also love. I mean, water is an extremely valuable resource and that falls free from the sky. Why we don't take more advantage of it as a clean, fresh water source, I don't understand. I would love to see more of that. Meredith?
Yeah, I can't think of an example right now in Dedham systems we have like along the roadway that do that. But we've had two redevelopment projects that have been permitted recently where the water table was quite high on the site and they weren't able to do like classic infiltration in the parking lot areas and stuff. So they both ended up doing kind of like land, and these are highly like commercial sites. So, there's tons of parking and they have existing landscape islands. And on these two sites, they use the landscape islands that would traditionally just be kind of like burnt up grass and like maybe a sad shrub or something. And they converted those to like little rain garden strips. And I think that's a really great way to kind of use every inch of the space that you're developing and trying to get some of those green infrastructure systems in. We also have seen the tree box method that Julie was talking about, where it's like a planter and water can kind of trickle in and then it gets treated as it moves through the tree box itself. So yeah, we're seeing more kind of interesting solutions, especially in areas where you can't just do the traditional infiltration. But all of that sounds great too. I hope we have more opportunities to implement that on our roadways.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions coming through. Just want to check in. I don't know, Julie, if you happen to get any questions, because I think you're a co-host, so folks technically are able to send you as well.
No,
But
I don't see anything. Um, Before we close up officially, I also just want to give a shout out and thank you to our funder for all of this work, which has primarily been the municipal vulnerability preparedness program, and then during earlier phases also a earmark or a community project fund, they call it, from Congresswoman Clark's office.
great. Yeah, and I guess I still don't see any other questions coming in, so we could kind of wrap up. I'll move a slide back to share that since the project has been going on for a couple of years, we do have a lot of resources on our project page. So please take your time to go through that page. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Julie. Again, we're always looking to partner with our watershed residents and community groups. So you can find my email on the slide as well as Julie's. And I think our emails are also on the project website. And with that, I guess I'll end with sharing my thanks to our speakers, Meredith and Hartman and Julie, for joining us today, and you all for joining for this late kind of dinner time webinar. Hopefully folks had a good time and learned a lot. Once we log out, you'll be directed to a survey. We hope you take the time to fill that out. If not, the survey is also on our website if you need a different day to fill it out.
Dara, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks, Sylvia.